Good morning, everyone in this wonderful location and around the world. My name is Wolfgang Fengler, and I've given many presentations in my life, but I've never given one with such an impressive lineup after me. So see this as the pre-entertainment to what will come. Michelle and I won't sing, I promise, but I'll let the data sing for you. Actually, guys, I need the clicker. Because I'll talk about prosperity on a livable planet, which is two of the big themes that we want to give context to. And once I have the clicker, I'll show you something special, because it's quite important to understand where we're coming from. I think I look around the room, many are a bit more my generation. Thank you. So born in the 70s or 60s, and let's remember back how life was then. So if you remember back, what happened the last 50 plus years, at that time we lived in a world of 3+ billion. Let's see what people had to say at that time.
If we continue to let population grow, it's very difficult for me to picture things holding together for more than another decade or so.
So this is Paul Ehrlich. I hope you heard him. He said, can't imagine the world holding together for another decade with population growth the way it has been. Well, look what happened. We're now at a world at 8 billion, more than double. Let's see what people have to say today.
I think that the biggest problem the world will face in 20 years is population collapse.
Quite interesting, huh? So at 3 billion, we were too many, and at 8 billion, we are too few. Now, the good news is Elon Musk is wrong too, because we will reach more than 9 billion in our lifetime, but it's a very different demographic context that our kids will live in. A much flatter demographic world, as you can see in that projection. So he at least has a point. So what I'll do now is I'll cover two of the big topics of our lifetime: prosperity, living the good life, but also protecting the environment, sustainability. And I'll run you through some of the big numbers to help you set the stage for today. So this is the latest estimates by my team at World Data Lab. We're a world of more than 8 billion. 600 million are still living in extreme poverty. People that Amina Mohammed today will talk about are the main focus of the UN, but also of the World Bank. But then there's a whole group that I know this group also cares about and will need to care about much more, is what you could call the forgotten 3 billion, the people who are vulnerable and who are still by many aspects very poor by our standards. Then is those who start to live the good life, as Homi Karas, who's also here today, called it in his middle class book, the lower middle class. And then are those, like many of us and those we love, who live fortunately in prosperity. And it's new, this number, and it's quite important because the previous CEO and president of Mastercard, who is now at the World Bank president, has actually established this new line of $25 per person per day, which also reflects the US poverty line, broadly speaking. And look there's 2.4 billion. So it's the largest group ever, but it's still just a third of the world. What's interesting for those of you from the friends from Mastercard interested in financial services is that if you reduce the children among this group, you get a number of 1.9 billion. That's slightly more than the credit card holders in the world. So you get a sense also where the credit card journey could go, but it's also the many other journeys of people who want to live the life you live. So if you add the numbers together, the left side and the right side, you will actually get a unique number, because for the first time in our lifetime, the right side is the bright side. 4.1 billion people are on the right side, which means those who lived the good life, so to say, even prosperous life. But still, and that's the inclusion challenge, that's the prosperity challenge, almost 4 billion don't have yet the chance to live that life. And that is the challenge of today and of tomorrow as well. Now let me show you the projections for the future. It's actually nice to think about real time, to imagine how is this number, now almost 2.4 billion of prosperous, changing in real time. In our estimate, it's actually 3 people per second. I'm not sure if you know how many seconds there are in a year. It's a bit morning math for you guys. There's actually 90 million. 31 million times 3 people per second, roughly, is 90 million that this ticker would move up. And you can imagine also if you're in the refrigerator business, in the motorcycle business, or in the credit card business, that's a number you should look at and count on. 2.9 billion by 2030, and then another billion by 2040. And the speed is not going down. In our projections, the speed is even slightly ticking up, but after 2040, you get slight reduction. So here's a different perspective. If you look at the lucky ones, like us, and those who are not yet in that fortunate situation. Since the millennium, both grew. Actually, also the non-prosperous grew. Population growth was more prosperous than none, but still enough people have had, families had actually more additions who were not part of the lucky ones. And you see the little tick up during COVID. In any projection that we made, this is the highest number ever of the non-prosperous. And now we're in the phase that even that green line is starting to come down, almost 3 billion prosperous, as I showed you, by 2030. And the question is, when do we have the tipping point? When are more people in the world prosperous than non-prosperous? And the year is 2049. That's in that projection, 2049. Feels like a long way to go, and it feels like we need to accelerate to close that gap. But also think a bit differently. Remember what you did at Millennium? It was just about yesterday, just a few global summits away, we had the Millennium. That was roughly 25 years ago. So when the time our children have our age, that's the time they can live in this, according to the projections, better and more prosperous, and for some of you, maybe interesting, also more profitable world. So let me come to the other part, which is you wonder, if there is more prosperity, despite the challenges, can we still maintain the planet livable? And here is something I want to share with you, because for that also we built a data model. It's the world emissions clock. In real time, you see the challenge, 2,000 tons per second. Already this year, we had 15 gigatons, 50 billion tons, and we may reach the highest number ever of emissions. So that's the bad news. The good news is there's a way to think about this differently, because there's enough good news underneath the bad news. And here I want to show you briefly something we did quite new with the World Bank chief economist to combine money and emissions. And the money part you know quite well. There's poor countries, there's $1, there's the $2 countries, middle income countries, and the rich countries. And you see the thresholds that are indicated there of what defines a poor, a middle income, and a rich country. What nobody has done yet, even though it sounds super simple, is to do the same for emissions. And so we defined a low emitter now, a clean country, 5 tons, medium 5 to 10, and a dirty country, 10 tons. And as you expect, the clean countries, although there are many people in there, don't have that many emissions. But also the poor countries, that's the green block, they don't have many emissions. So we should also not worry so much about emissions in poor countries, because it doesn't make as much a difference. They should think much more about growth and prosperity. The climate battle will be won or lost in the middle income countries. That's where most people are. That's where 100 countries are. And the biggest block is the red bottom block, middle income, high emitters. But the main message is not to single out China, which, by the way, has been stabilizing now its emissions, but it's to show you there's a lot of diversity. You can be middle income and dirty, so to say. You can be middle income and middle, like Indonesia, and we have the finance minister here today, or you can be quite low emitter, like India, only at 2.8 tons per capita, even though that is still a large country and a high emitter. But more interestingly, let's look at the rich countries, and to have obviously caused that problem, you see the same diversity. You see a problem country like the US, but I'll tell you in a second, it's not the worst. You have Germany, my home country, which is medium but not so great. But then you have 4 countries that are rich and clean. Anybody from Sweden here today? Sweden, congratulations. We just upgraded Sweden. Sweden moved up into that clean bucket. Not perfect yet, just at 5 tons per capita, but you're among these 4 exclusive countries. I hope you know the other flags too, Romania, Malta, and Chile. Those are these countries that have achieved that ideal status to be rich and clean. So that's the context. So to close for you, let me do a final data exercise and go even further and to see can we achieve this ideal stage. Here are some big numbers I'll walk you through. 7.5 tons. That are we are emitting if we were average world citizens and consumers. And you see the distribution across the countries. Where is the US? Is it in the top 3 among the G20 countries? No. Saudi Arabia is the highest, 26. Canada is way higher than the US, 25 tons per capita. So sorry for the Canadians here and online. Australia is worse than the US, 22 tons. The US is actually at 18 tons. Still a very bad number, but it's better than the others, and it has gotten better. The US actually reduced emissions over the last 2 years. Canada didn't. So there are these interesting nuances you can do when you play with the data. The US, the EU is quite good compared to the others, but still not good enough, 8.2 tons per capita. Without Germany, it would actually be almost at the world average. But so let's just think harder even one more time. Can we do even better than the examples you saw? And there's just too few Swedens out there. So what we did now is to select the best in the world, the best rich countries in these 5 sectors. And here is the result. You get South Korean agriculture, because they do a lot of reforestation. You get Dutch transport. You get British industry, whatever there is in British industry still. There is Swiss energy. They have obviously mountains, and there is Swedish buildings. That's the best of the world. And look at the number. It's a very low number now, 3.1 tons. And if these countries who have been doing well in these sectors keep their promises, there'll be only 2.2 tons by 2030. That's 50% below what Paris Agreement said we should achieve as a world community. So these countries are good countries to live in. Not everybody can be like South Korea, Holland, or Switzerland, but you can also copy the second best or the third best. So that lets me conclude to say we should not choose between consumption and climate. We should aim for a much better world, a world that is prosperous and clean. Thank you very much.